Well, okay. So happy friendiversary, first of all.
I know. Happy for anniversary. Happy 3117.
Such cute friends we are. Okay, so basically, the way I envision this episode's titling, it's gonna be something like Are Men Intuitive? It's gonna be something like that. Like very
Right.
simple, but to right off the bat, like I feel like we want to just address that the answer is duh. But the reason we're even talking about this is because I think that there is a multi-reasoned illusion that
Mm,
more women are intuitive. And I think that's because, generally speaking, we don't even know what intuition is. So
right.
it's kind of a multi-tiered thing.
Yeah.
And as I said in the introduction, the reason we're kind of kicking off like with this is because you're one of the most intuitive people I know. Sit with
Thank
that for a bit because yeah. So you're forced to receive it.
you. Oh God, she knows me so well. She knows I have to sit here and take it because everyone's watching. You know what though? I have actually thought about it about like intuition, and I really do think I have no evidence behind this, but
I love
my
this.
thought is that it's very much tied to like feminine energy. And so I think like if you are somebody like women naturally are just going to be more identified with feminine energy. Um, and of course there are going to be women that are more identified with masculine energy. And of course they may not be as intuitive because I feel like on the flip side, like yeah, you're gonna have men. I feel like with me, I definitely grew up around really powerful feminine energy with my mom and my sisters. And so I think it was just something that I learned to cultivate early and young in life. Um,
Mm.
and so I think like that is the key ingredient, I think, to like intuitive people. It's like people that are willing and are able to be in touch with that feminine energy and hold it.
Mhm. Okay, like you pinpointed it. It is the being connected to feminine energy because if we look at that, really the hallmark of feminine energy is the ability to receive, right? Like that's the receptive frequency.
Yeah.
And because intuition requires receiving, if you
Mm,
can't do that, you can't access it.
so true.
And I think that the reason it comes from women is like there's a couple different reasons. I think first of all, we're socialized to talk about feelings. So that's
Right.
because intuition, deals with what you're feeling. There's a kind of a socialized edge. And I think that intuition comes from the body and the
Yes.
intelligence of it, right? It's the intelligence of the
Yeah.
heart and the womb. And it's the energetic organs, not the brain. So anybody who's been kind of like allowed to live in that heart space or like womb space with women, as it were, it's like you've had better access to that. But like you said,
Mhm.
growing up in that frequency, you wouldn't have built the heart wall that like a lot of men would have built, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true because yeah, with emotions too, like you're absolutely right. Like it is in the body, and with intuition, like it's the gut, like it's that mind gut connection, and it is a deeper wisdom that exists in your body.
Mm,
And it
hmm
is if thoughts are one way of like receiving information, emotions are a highway of receiving information, and then like intuition
Mm,
is like broadband spectrum of receiving information.
I love
And
that.
it's so subtle, like you really have to be keen, like tuned into it, and it does take time because even now like I still think I'm very ignorant in listening to my intuition. Like I still feel really immature, like I'm developing still.
Oh my God. Whoa, actually, that's a really good because first of all, it's hilarious to hear you say that, just like knowing how in touch with your intuition you are. Like, wow. But it's also interesting that you say that because in order to develop the skill of intuition, because really it is, right? Like it's a level of intelligence that we haven't
Mm.
that most people haven't been taught is there. So you are kind of
Yeah.
we're all beginners at it in a way, and you have to be okay with that. which is also like part of, I think, the receiving frequency, which is like we're not taught to like learn new things and be seen trying. And actually, you're really, really good at that in general. Like, I feel like you dive in. Well, it's actually funny because one of the things is skydiving, but you dive into new things all the time. And have you always been like that? Because I feel like that is probably connected to how strong your connection with your intuition is. But yeah, is that newer as an
Yeah.
adult or?
I mean, I think I've always had that as a kid. I think it's definitely tied to my curiosity and I think
Mm,
like imagination. So like, being versed in creativity or like I seek it out constantly. So like there's always
mm,
curiosity and trying new things, specifically if it has to do with self-expression. But then yeah, that just starts to open doors to like more things. Like, oh, if I could do that, like, well, I could probably do this, or I'm really interested in that. I've always been interested in that. Why have I never pursued something in that? And so yeah, it's interesting because I've always tied it to curiosity, but I do think that that is also tied to intuition too, right? Like
hmm.
it is the thing that whispers in your ear at night of just like, what about this? Go try this. So I think that tied with curiosity is like those are the two ingredients I think you need in order to, or at least that drives me into trying new things all the time.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, that's so, I feel like as adults, at least in the West, we get disconnected from being curious because we're trying to, right? And that's like living in the masculine energy thing, like of needing to appear as an expert or needing to appear as, and if you think about it, because intuition, like you said, is that gentle whisper, it's less important to invent answers than to have the questions. Like
Yeah.
it's the whole point. So
Yeah, totally. Oh, go ahead.
no, 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 just I'm just thinking out loud because I feel like that like do you know where that comes from? Your curiosity. I'm
Ooh.
curious about your curiosity.
Where did that come from? I love that we just shifted in our chairs at the exact same
I
time.
know, I noticed that too.
Twins.
Adorable.
I don't know, really. I That is a great question. I've never really thought about it. But it's like I feel like it's one of those phenomenons that comes out of that awareness, right? Like you're not your thoughts, you're the one observing them. I think it's like the same thing where it's just like this removed thing is like will just emanate this thing called curiosity. And I don't I think maybe even just being aware of like what is happening in life and just being plugged in, I think it just innately makes you want to seek things out because you understand that your time is finite and that um well then there's things I want to do. And it just makes you beg
Yeah.
questions. And I think out of those questions comes the desire for uh to learn more. Which is funny because desire is often tied with ego, and ego is like the opposite
Mm,
of intuition, right? Because like ego's loud, intuition's quiet.
mm, hmm. Yes. Yeah, that's a really good. I'm thinking so much of your like one of your biggest I don't even know if I would call it a hobby because I feel like it started as a hobby and it's like serious at this point, but improv. I
Yeah.
feel like that is probably if you could pick an activity that's one of the most intuitive things I think you could do because it requires self-trust. You gain self-trust. You're trusting other people. The whole idea of yes and like following a a frequency
Yeah.
really. Like that, do you
It,
think that
oh my
yeah.
God, totally. Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I say this all the time to people when I when I'm talking about improv, is that I never learned how to actually actively listen until I did improv.
Mm,
Because it's all about being in the present moment and it's about like giving an authentic reaction to what your scene partner just gave you. In order to do that, you have to actively listen. You have to be in that moment with them. And so I think once again, like those are the ingredients that like you're given that, and then once you realize it and you start to accept that and operate with it and live with it, again, I think it's like it's impossible not to eventually run into your intuition.
Mm,
Because
mhm,
you know, you think about that, like you're always in the present moment. You just said it, like it's about listening to your body. And again, if that's not something you're used to doing, and that wasn't something that like I did very well, I didn't even listen to other people, let alone my own body. So once I started learning that you know, the skills of listening to others, then I began applying it to yourself. And again, once you're if you're being more mindful, if you're being more present, then it's yeah, you're gonna find that eventually. So I do think it's an excellent art form to if somebody wants to develop their intuition or curiosity or creativity, this is something that'll feed all the above, you know.
mhm. Wow, yeah. Oh my God. The thing, but listening is receiving, right? So like that's huge, the fact that you just said that. That's a really big one. Um, what do you think, like at what point do you think, like at what point did you learn how to listen to your body and what did that look like for you?
Oh man. I mean, I think like for a long time, something I've always told you about, and just for you know your audience here is that you know I grew up a highly sensitive kid. Didn't realize it until I was an adult that I was like, oh my God, I am this person. I saw those
Mhm.
symptoms, or like, you know, hey, this is what defines a highly sensitive person. It was like, oh my God, that's me. That was me my
Characteristics,
whole life.
yeah.
But I didn't realize it. And
Mhm.
and it certainly like I was just in environments that weren't suited for me. And you know, I reacted to it really aggressively. And so I became severely depressed when I was a kid. And I've had that my whole life. But through that, I really became attuned to my body because you can feel it. I felt it in my body first before my my headspace started going down. I can feel when I was like, oh no, I just tipped, like a depression wave is coming. Like I can feel it going through my spine and my body. So I think like
Wow.
hilariously, ironically, it was like through the worst days of my life that I actually learned how to listen to my body because yeah, you know that wisdom goes both ways. It can be great for the good things and it can also be
Mm.
great for the bad things, like great for like
Mm.
getting prepared and surviving the bad things, like you know it's coming. And so like that's when I probably learned I didn't realize it, but
Mm.
that's when
Mhm.
that's what I was learning. And then
Yeah.
fast forward
Wow.
to COVID and you know everybody's stuck inside and starting to do therapy and finally starting to take medication. And then, you know, you just have to sit with it. You have to kind of ride the wave sometimes. And it was
Mm.
in that moment that I actually learned how to like, okay, actively, consciously sit with the body, feel these emotions. Where is it coming from? Again, both the good and the bad, because I was so used to how my body felt in survival mode that
Mm.
being in a good
Mhm.
place was so uncomfortable.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like it always felt
So
like
good.
the other shoe's about to drop. And so I would
Oh,
put myself back in survival mode. Like I would
distract and
totally. And yeah, so like you kind of have to learn like being a kid and it's not being afraid of looking like an idiot. Like I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. People probably learned how to regulate this stuff when they were 6, 7 years old, but here I am at 30 something years old learning how to do it.
I think that's actually the gift of sensitive people. Like I feel like we need sensitive people so much because I don't think it's that most people learned to regulate when they were 6, 7. I don't think anybody learned how to do that. I think
That's
a lot of
fair,
people
actually.
have like maladapted so early that they don't
Right.
even know that's not how they'd be if they
Right.
listened. But they never learned to do that. And when you're not sensitive, I feel like you don't notice that voice. So the physical sensations that you
Uh-huh.
noticed, which those are detailed, like to feel it the way you said specifically, like down your spine, not even just as a general heaviness, but to feel it in a part of your body.
Oh
That to
yeah.
me is advanced. Like that's like, oh, you're like sensitive to the point you can feel it in detail. And I feel like that's why
Yeah.
we need sensitive people talking, describing things and talking about what it's like so that people who maybe don't realize how masked they are can start to sort of get a little bit more
Yeah.
curious, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you were saying that, it just sort of reminded me too, because yeah, there were really specific things. Like I remember like it would like wash through me the feeling, and it would start in the top left side of my shoulder in the front, and then it would like wash through my body down the spine, out like the right back bottom, right? So like that was the feeling, the sensation of
Wow.
like when I knew like a depression wave was coming, like it was that specific feeling. Um,
My
and then there
God.
were just like other sensations that I would feel, and I'd be like, okay, this is, later on I learned like, oh, that was anxiety. Like when I get anxiety, like I know it's this like really specific chill, and it's like
Mm.
right in the center of the spine in the back, on just right off of the sides, and it would just be tingling up and down. But later in life, once again, when like the good emotions started
Mm.
filling in, what's interesting is I feel like there is a reciprocal sensation to match the opposite of that emotion. Um, and what I mean by that is, uh, I mean, you've done Enneagrams, right? We've talked about Enneagrams.
Yeah. Hmm.
In
Hmm.
Enneagrams, like they'll give you like when you're a healthy, I'm a four. So when you're a healthy
Yeah.
four, when you're an average
Hmm.
four, when you're an unhealthy four. And what's
Yes.
interesting is if you read like what's happening, and it's like, oh, you can be when you're healthy, you're very open and understanding, and like you're somebody that people want to be around. It states all these things, right? And then you can tie that to personality traits. But then when you read the unhealthy stuff, to me, when I'm reading it, and it's like, oh, you can be highly judgmental. It can be,
Mm.
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what it says, but if you look at it, it's the same quality of who you are, the same trait. It's just being expressed in an unhealthy way.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Oh, like the shadow of the same. Like if your skill is
Yes.
detail oriented, then the shadow of it is judgmental. But that's
That's
actually,
it.
yes, the dual aspects of the same
Boom. You've hit
thing.
it.
That's so interesting.
So what I found is that I was having the same thing with emotions and the body's sensations. Because that anxiety, like that same sensation, when I was like genuinely excited for something, I would start getting that exact same feeling in that exact same place on my body.
Wow. Oh,
But my mind was
wow.
trained into anticipate, like that is anxiety, right? Like something bad's happening right now.
Oh my God, this is so interesting. So then you would experience anxiousness even though you were like you were feeling happy.
Right. And so
Wow.
I found that there were all of these like things where I would feel it in my chest, in my back, on my arms, and it would be tied to a specific negative emotion. But then I would feel the equal and opposite happy emotion. And I was like, oh my God, it's so interesting how the body's feeling it almost the exact same way. But it's just like it's its shadow, it's its dual. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I don't know if that's true for everybody. I don't know. Like, have you ever felt that?
You know what? That's so funny. I was just going to say this is a gift because no, I feel things differently. I don't tend to, because I've heard from people who feel things in their body the way that you do. Like they can pinpoint specific. I don't generally like feel it in my body in that detail.
Mm,
I notice things with myself. Like if I'm getting anxious, I notice it more behaviorally. Like
mm, right.
I'll feel I'm irritated. The way that I respond to things is different. Like that's when I'm like, oh, I'm
Oh,
anxious.
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's so useful to hear your analysis of it because the fact that that's you can pinpoint it, I'm like, oh, that's happening in my body too. I just don't feel it the same way, but my nervous system's doing the same thing
Right.
because I found for me when I started to feel more free, like when I was coaching, that feeling of expansion also felt scary as hell. And it's like, oh, I'm not used to freedom. Like you kind of have to train yourself to experience the good you haven't allowed. And it does feel like anxiety. So the fact that you just like pointed to the physical sensation being the same. I'm like, oh, the that sort of more general, more emotional feeling for me is this that's you're expressing how I feel it. Just for me, it's
Right.
not pinpointed to locations, which I feel like is
Yeah.
super useful. So I'm kind of jealous.
Again, like that's a lot of this is understanding it retroactively. It's looking back and understanding
Mm,
it because
yeah,
for a good chunk of time, like life, I didn't. It was just data. I was just like, I don't know what to do with this information. I'm just gonna throw
right.
it over there. And like retroactively, I like look back through it and be like, oh my god, that was like it was the body and the mind trying to help and regulate. And
Ah,
um,
it's
go ahead, please.
no, you go.
Um, well, what I was gonna say was, it is interesting because the body, if you are paying attention to it, it does feel like you're able to. It's so funny. You were saying like even when you're feeling the expanse, like you're expanding. If you're not tuned into your body, I feel like it's so difficult to be able to do things like that or to be able to process things. And like
Mhm.
you and me talk about all the time is like when we fall unconscious, when we start living unconsciously again. And I always find that like when I become more conscious and start living more consciously, it is the moment that I'm able to tune into the body and pay attention to it much more.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, that resonates big time. Yeah. I heard something this week. It was like if if you are experiencing something. Oh, okay. It was Emily Fletcher. She's a meditation teacher. And if there's a problem in the spiritual, it'll communicate with you. Like, so if your soul's suffering, if there's like something energetic going on, it'll communicate first mentally. And if it can't get your attention mentally, it goes to the body. So
Oh,
those are like the levels of the, right? So
yeah.
if you think about, right, it's where intuition's coming from. It's like if you ignore it when it's a thought, it becomes a sensation or a
Yeah.
problem, like a physical problem. And I think, people don't realize that even the word disease, right? It's dis-ease. It's when your body has felt something, it's because that's coming from somewhere. That's coming from your intuition. There's an issue you're ignoring, and then the whole system just gets, we're so interconnected. And I feel like that's why it's so crucial for every human to know that intuition is a human gift. Like it's a psychic skill. And I feel like it's because we have issues with concepts like psychic that gets lost, and it's like we
Right.
experience much less what shows up as mental health or physical health issues would be
Yeah.
so much more easily mitigated if we realize that okay, this is coming from the spiritual level through intuition, you know?
Yeah. 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 Wow. Oh man, I
So
love that.
so how did you, because I remember like when we started talking about intuition, I remember you hadn't realized that you were intuitive, right? Like it was
Yeah.
like you were using that skill without even knowing it. So like how have you kind of consciously developed that, or how does your intuition speak to you? Like can you kind of give some examples?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think the moment that everything like I officially decided to change and say like, no, this is a thing and I am intuitive was it was unfortunate. It came out of an incredibly negative experience in life. It was having to deal with the fallout of two friendships and individuals who were lying to me and just betrayal of love. And my gut was always screaming at me when I was talking to these individuals. And it was just like, something's not right, something's not right, something's off, something's off. And I knew something was going on between them before I had any evidence that something was going on between them because my body was just screaming it. And every time I was around the guy specifically, it was just such discomfort, like physical discomfort, that I was just
Mm,
like nothing's changed, right? Like he just walked around the corner and all of a sudden, like, the body is just like reacting, like, don't trust this dude, don't talk to him, like get away
mm,
from him. And now I look back at those experiences. This is over the course of like a year and a half, 2 years, and so I look back at that time and I just think of every moment when something significant had happened, a lie, or something was going on behind my back that I wasn't aware of, but I just had an awareness. I knew something was. I look back and I just go like, wow, I my intuition was screaming at me, like trying to tell me what was up. And I was ignoring it, or at least just
Mm.
trying to work with the information I was being given by these two people who are
Mm.
struggling with their own deal, like sense of narcissism. And so like I'm getting false information, but I'm choosing to believe these people. I'm trying to
Right.
give them
Yeah.
benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And I overrode my intuition several times. And then it
Mm.
got to the end, and I was just like, when I walked away from those friendships officially, and I was just like, I am, if there were two great things that came out of that. It was like, one, found out who your real friends are. Two, as much as I hated going through that experience, I'm actually like really grateful because I understand, I speak the language my intuition speaks now.
Oh, that's good. That's
I
really
can
good.
decipher my intuition now, like not as clearly. It's still something you have to work at and define,
Mm-hmm.
refine. But yeah, like you got me this intuition journal, and actually, like that was so
Uh,
helpful. I love it. And it was in the daily stuff when you had to write, and you're just like sitting there, and like week by week, it's like I got nothing. Like what happened today? I don't. Nothing intuitive happened today.
yes.
But
Yeah.
for me, like my career is really like the main vessel in which I've learned and grown in life. And so it is the space in which I always am like outputting and learning the most. And even with intuition. And I would just sit there and I would think about the meetings, the emails. And there would be moments where it was just like, my gut is telling me, okay, this problem that we're dealing with, I really strongly believe that we need to do this. Like, we need to go talk to this person. I need to hand over responsibility to this person. This person needs to be aware of what needs to happen. Or just, we're troubleshooting an issue and everyone's throwing ideas out there. And it's like, that idea is good. That idea also has some tidbits of good. Maybe we should take these things and like create this other thing. And over time, like just time and time again, I just noticed that I would clock when I had those feelings and I didn't act on them. Months would go by, and sure enough, the solution someone else presented, the thing that leadership asked us to do, the thing that finally got us through was the thing that we was like the kernel of an idea that was at the start of what I thought we should have done.
Mm.
And did you ever listen to have you read Rick Rubin's The Creative Act?
No, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Okay. And he also talks about it on podcasts. So you can listen to him talking about this. But what I love is the way that he talks about creativity and like, where does it come from and ideas. And I really love the way that he said it. And I'm paraphrasing this is that, you know, if you're creative and you're in tune with the universe and like your antenna is up, like ideas, creative ideas, like you don't own them. They don't come from, you or me. Like it is the universe, right? It is out there. And when an idea is ready, it is just going to send the signals out, and whoever's antennas are up, they're going to receive the idea, which is why you'll see that people will write a
So
similar
good.
song or a similar book at the same time.
Yes. Oh,
And it's because that's the time for that idea, right? Like it's time.
oh, yes.
And I do feel like that's the same thing, is that like I witnessed that happening at work, whereas like I had the idea, I didn't act on it. So the idea found someone else,
Mm,
another antenna that was up,
mm.
and they acted on it.
Wow.
And so
That's
I
really
look back
good.
at, yeah, so I look back at those moments and I was just like, that was my intuition. That was my intuition. I should have
Mm,
listened. Um, and it is a mixture of like the learned skills, the patterns of human behavior and work behavior at work in tandem with your creativity and intuition. Like it is all these things. Like you cannot just lean on the one thing and not
mm.
develop the others. You got to be developing all of them. And again, that's just true for me because my
Yeah.
career is the place where I grew and learned. For other people, it's going to be family. For some people, it's going to be, a hobby. Um,
Hmm.
so wherever your thing is, like all the skills that are associated with it, on top of your intuition and maybe your curiosity and creativity, is going to be the thing that will help you identify what you need to be doing and cultivate it. So now I know if I ever get a sense of like, no, we really need to do this thing, or I really want to talk to that person. I'm not, nobody's like, I feel like I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going to go do this thing, but it feels like the right thing to do. I'm willing to go get in trouble for that thing. That's my intuition. I'm just like, go do it.
I love that so much because that's so different than the ego-based framework, right? Where it's like you're I think that's the difference between intuition and ego in a work scenario. Like there's not that like you want to act on the intuitive nudge, but it's not that the force of ego because ultimately you want credit for the thing. It's because you are aligned with, okay, things will work better if we do this, right? And I feel like
Yeah,
sometimes that's why it takes practice and self-trust because I feel like often ego's the quicker one to act. Like the egoic
sure.
is because
Oh,
there's no
yeah.
fear of pursuit there. It's always chasing. It's always like, oh, maybe. But intuition is the quieter one. So that's the one
Yes.
that I think takes more time to cultivate because it does take confidence to stay with something when you don't have that, fire on your heels of like wanting to be the person who gets it. It's a much
Yeah,
quieter confidence. So it's like knowing that.
totally.
And I love that idea of like the examining it in hindsight because I think that's really how it develops because it's so subtle. That intuition journal is such a good example because like I'm on my third one. Like you detail every day, something intuitive that happens every day. And exactly like you said, when you start it, you're like nothing. And then after you
Nothing.
did you find that you
Nothing.
start filling it, you're like, oh, there's nudge on nudge here. Or
Yeah,
there'll be like,
you just gotta like start writing. Okay, what do I think it is? Like, even if you're wrong,
yeah.
write it, because the thing that you think you should write is your intuition. Like, you're intuitively thinking about what your
Yeah.
intuition is, right? So like, even if
Hmm.
you get it wrong, just like keep writing it, because you're going to sharpen that tool, that sensibility, and eventually you are going to start writing exactly what your intuition was that day eventually.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So, like, how okay, because of my riffraff Zoom, we have 5 minutes left. Do you
Yeah,
think do you think that's enough to wrap this up? It now gives you a buffer time of 10 minutes in between if
oh,
you have
does it?
riffraff Zoom. Yeah. I think we could probably, I'm gonna edit this part out. We could probably wrap up this particular episode in five, right?
Sure, I think so. It
Okay.
just depends, like, what else do you want to touch
Because
on?
I don't want to lose anything. Like this is so good. Well, we could always do a part two. Um,
Yeah, we
like
could always
another
just like
time.
end the call, start another call.
But um okay, so yeah, let's try to wrap up and then we'll go back to your other link
Sure.
and just chat.
Yeah.
Um okay, so here's one. Just how has your life changed? Like what do you think your life would be like had you not developed your intuition? What's the difference between your life before and after?
Oh man, that is a great question. I think that there is a greater sense of self-trust, of just um self-confidence in just moving through life, because
Mhm.
like, obviously you're still going to make mistakes, and you're still going to fuck things up, and um but I don't know, I definitely feel like I walk through it a little bit more myself, authentically myself, because that I certainly, before developing that, there was always this fear of like, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I get this wrong? Like, oh, I don't want to be, you don't want to sound like an idiot. You don't want to like ruffle feathers. Like, oh, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, which again is just part of my whole mental health journey. But you can certainly see that, like, as I've grown with my intuition, I've also healed in other areas. And as I've healed in other
Mhm.
areas, my intuition's gotten stronger. And I think
Mhm.
you just have more faith in yourself, in that you'll figure it out, because your gut will
Mhm.
speak with you, and you will it will tell you when it's just like, that is terrible, don't do that. um on
Mm.
top of your conscious and your morals and your ethics and everything else and your survival skills. Again, I just think these things complement each other, and so I certainly have
Mm.
felt I'm more comfortable walking through this life because I know it'll be there to
Oh
help.
my God, I love that. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah, and you so well explained the spiral. The more you get in touch with your intuition, the more that heals other aspects of you. Because, like, if you think about even the energy drain of having that voice in your head, because I've had it
Mm.
too, and we all have, of the second guessing, the da da da,
Oh my God,
that's like,
yeah.
oh God, it's like having apps
Huge energy drain.
backgrounding. Like, yes, that's draining you daily. And as your intuition strengthens, you gain back so much energy that feeds back into developing your intuition. And it's just like, that's the upward spiral.
Yeah.
It's the compound interest, all right, of developing this
Yeah.
skill. Like it's exponential.
It's I'm really just like kind of clocking ever since you asked this question. And yeah, as you're explaining that, like, um, with severe depression or and probably most mental health issues, I think you just have like a certain sense of misalignment with yourself, right?
Mm,
Like,
mhm,
and again, based on the
mhm.
severity, that could also
Yeah.
mirror the severity of your like misalignment. And as you start to kind of get more aligned, this really has felt like the thing that's felt like it's missing, right? Like I've always had these pieces of myself in my life, but there's been no like mortar that like brought it all together. And it
Mm.
definitely feels like again, I can point at this moment of intuition of like when I developed it. I can point to that moment as like from that moment on, it really did feel like my identity started to come together.
Wow.
And again, I think
Wow.
you can contribute it to a lot of things, but I would in the end of the day, I would say like I think the key piece was intuition.
Amazing. We left it right there because that was such a mic drop. And I just want to thank Neil for the episode because I loved this conversation. And I think it's such an important one to have, especially where intuition concerns men. Because it's such an important conversation in general, just to understand that there is a deeper wisdom that we can access and we can trust. And the more we're able to do that in our lives, the more smoothly everything flows because, it's so important to remember that we're part of a collective and the more smoothly we can operate in our individual lives, the stronger we become as a collective. That self-trust becomes a collective trust. And it's just a beautiful symbiotic interconnectivity. Anyway, you heard the episode. Neil doesn't really have public things to point to, um, but he will be on further episodes. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have more conversations. He's a creative, so we're going to be talking about probably the artist's way program. We're going to be talking about how creativity is channeled and a whole bunch of other stuff, mental health. There are a lot of directions we can take the conversation. And I just love talking to Neil, so you will definitely see him again. Next week, I have a conversation with Matthew from Madhouse, and that is a creative collective that I can't even introduce at this point. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be really cool. What he's doing in Vancouver is really groundbreaking. And so I'm excited to bring these spiritual, intuitive, well-rounded, feminine frequency, especially men on the podcast to kind of widen our lens of what healthy humans not only look like, but what we're capable of at our best. So, thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you next time.